All right, so welcome to another episode on the Uplifters channel. I guess in a way, this could be our Media Moguls show because we took the night off yesterday, or it could be our NFT game day show. But we're going to be back tomorrow with NFT game day. But one of the things I really like doing on the show, and I don't know why, but it just, the more I do it, the more I want to do it. So we don't have a Media Moguls intro, but we do have an NFT game intro. And being we could go either way on this one, why don't you guys share this out and we'll watch the intro.
I'm not the bubble. 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 I'm not the bubble.
I'm pretty excited about this one today. Corey is out of the loop, sending me best wishes, but he'll be back very soon. We have KMO from Jeb.io. He's a podcaster. A bunch of other things that just screamed to me that we needed to have him on the show. But how I found him actually was our resident Jedi Kawimoto sent me a message that said, "Hey, dude, you should go check out this gallery in the Uplift. There's some really cool, images that are popping up." And I went there, and it was like three of my favorite things already. One of them was comics that I'd never heard of. So I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna write this post because I do wanders around the Uplift and write posts about it. And then I thought maybe I should introduce the guy who in the project. And I started reading the bio, and I was just like, man, it's like this guy is been living next door to me, and we've been doing everything together in parallel universes our whole entire lives almost. So KMO, let's get the quick rundown introduction from you.
Okay.
Who are you and what do you do? And then we'll dive a little bit deeper.
Well, I'm KMO, and most people who don't know me in real life but who know who I am know me as a podcaster. I started the Sea Realm podcast in October of 2006, just a few months after I learned that there was such a thing as podcasting. The comic is Geb.io, and Geb was, I guess still is, to the extent that he ever was anything, Geb was the Egyptian god of the earth, but it's also an acronym. It stands for the Greater Earth Betterment Bureau, and it's about a bunch of aliens who live in an underground base in Antarctica. And they do the usual alien thing. They go out and they kidnap people and they bring them back and give them anal probes. But they don't want to do it. They don't like doing it. It's just their job. So they can see that the Earth is in bad shape in terms of, environmental degradation and climate stability. And they'd like to help. But again, it's not their job. And that's communicated, I think, in the strip that I put up on the wall at the Geb Gallery in Uplift.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool that you were actually the artist. So did you? We'll probably head over there in a bit and check it out. But did you actually build that yourself, or
I built that myself? Now the great big open pit mine that you see is actually the next door neighbors.
Oh, really? Okay, I screwed that up. I just assumed that was your, because there's actually a nice throughway there, and I wasn't looking at the coordinates. That's funny. Yeah, so this is the, you can see the cover image here of the gallery that really enticed me on the wall. And I was like, wow, I was a big comic fan in high school. My early years in high school in Canada, I used to, walk down to the comic books, card shop but I was a little bit bizarre because I was into like really offbeat comics. So like I was a big fan of Image comics or Volant comics, like the Volant universe. If you're not that familiar with comics, the Volant universe kind of like did the Marvel universe better, but nobody bought into it because it was all like overhyped and too many issues were released. But they had this whole series that ran across. So when I see things like this, I'm like, oh, what is this? And then it's pretty cool. Shout out to Kawe Moto from taking this image, and I was just like, this is the image he sent me, and he's like, you got to check this out, man. Like,
that's a nice shader, by the way.
Right, it's a shader, and I think he played around with it a little bit too, but I was like, this is really good, right? Like, and yeah, so we went through the gallery, and I got off the tracks there, and it was rainy, and I looked around, and this is a really nice sign. It tells you to go check out Geb.io. I think this was the comic that you were referring to.
Yeah.
That's on the wall. In the I don't know. Do you want to be is that an alien or an ant?
Both.
Okay.
These are two aliens. The guy sitting behind the desk is the new boss.
Okay.
We call him VZ, but his name is VZ7007Z. And he's the new boss. He doesn't care about anything except getting promoted. He wants to get the numbers up and, get promoted and get transferred to a more prestigious assignment. And he doesn't care anything at all about the Earth. And the ant is his second in command, who had been, the chief executive officer on site until the new boss showed up. And now that the new boss is here, her name is Edwina, by the way. And Ed, for short, is really, really happy to have a boss over her now because she's, she's from a colony species, like a termite hive or an ant hive or ant colony. And she was bred for middle management, and it's just not in her DNA to be the boss. So she was really relieved to have a boss show up.
I love it.
Yeah. And, she's just trying to get him to pay attention to the situation on Earth. And he's like, I'm here to do my job, and that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. And
I guess this is my bad. This is the excavation site of the plot next door, which is interesting.
Yeah. And they really irritated me when they did that because they tore out the floor right in front of my spot. So there's a deadly drop. There's now when you visit the Geb gallery, you run the risk of having to respawn somewhere because you're going to fall to your death if you're not careful.
Yeah, but I just put a fence up there or something. I don't know.
Well, there's a wall basically. I mean, I closed off the entrance.
Oh, I see what you mean when you go through the portal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry. I have this thing that I can get a little bit higher and do some interesting photos, but this was interesting to me. I was like I've never actually seen a bed below the floor, and I thought that's an interesting concept. Now, this was my favorite part about the gallery, and this doesn't really showcase it that well, to be honest. But if you go to the gallery and you wander around and you start looking at all of these little openings that are in the walls, they change depending upon where you are in the plot, and I turned around and I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. There's the alien, right? And so they just pop up.
I think you must be cheating in that one though. Were you in creative mode and floating a bit?
I might have been,
because typically when you're standing there, what you're supposed to see is the title of the comic through that window.
Yeah, I do for images, let's go cheat a little bit, but so I didn't even notice that. And so, but again, back here, I don't know. I think I might've been standing on the bed or the chest, so I still think it works. But it was really fun to do that. I mean, if you got wings or something. Now, Galactic Underground, that's kind of the comic, but what really enticed me was the history. So I'd like to dive into that a little bit. So sure. You've lived in Japan, in Australia, in 9 states, spent 2 years in the Eco Village Training Center on the farm in Somerton, Tennessee. moved from Brooklyn to a small village in rural Vermont, and you
This
describe it
needs to be
yourself.
updated because now I'm in Arkansas.
Okay, and you describe yourself as a recovering libertarian and singletarian. Let me tell you a little bit about me.
All right.
So my name is Jimmy D. I'm from a small town in Canada. I used to go to the barn to ride around pigs, but I didn't have to work because my dad was pretty cool. He's like, this is my thing. You don't have to do that. I got kind of, as far away from home as I could from my small town.
What part of Canada?
Well, if you've ever seen the show Letterkenny, I'm basically from there. So
I have not seen that show.
You should definitely check it out. I don't want to. I from Ontario.
Okay.
So yeah, outside of Toronto. That's as far as I'll go. People might be able to figure it out, but I went to university. I ended up studying philosophy. I ended up relocating and moving to Mexico for a while, and then ended up in Japan. I stayed here for about a decade. I worked as a teacher, because I checked the newspaper. There were no philosopher wanted ads in the newspaper. I ended up moving to Hawaii and studying education. And I got involved with a lot of cultural education, and I ended up doing permaculture, a lot of permaculture, community organized permaculture, and school organized permaculture. They had a really cool outfit there where you would go and you would volunteer at a place for 2 times, and then your place could be on the list. And it fits in with the culture a lot there. We ended up coming back to Japan. After that, I went to Australia and New Zealand on 2 different occasions, and I studied permaculture and earthworks.
Right on.
And then I ended up coming back here and trying to kind of launch and start a business, but it's difficult because like most of the people already kind of have like natural farming by Masanobu Fukuoka kind of built into their genes if they're in the country, and if they're in the city, they feel like you shouldn't be growing food on your balcony, which just drives me crazy. Right? And yeah, so like just reading that first and one of the first articles I ever wrote actually I just posted this actually. One of the first articles I ever actually wrote in the blockchain space was this one, which is called Permaculture and Blockchain, more similar than you might think. And I reposted this, and it was a look at like the facets of decentralization. And it's interesting because like I revisited this after I read about you, and I was like, this actually makes even more sense now, because I'm going through some stuff that I'm dealing with that I'm just like, wow, like, it's not only government centralization that's a problem. It's like, corporation centralization, and it happens in the blockchain space too. But that's a whole other, other story. But that's me. That's Jimmy D. And so you can see just from that first paragraph how how much overlap there is. So yeah, tell me your story. What was the whole permaculture thing? What's the recovering libertarian thing? I'm really curious about this because I might have more facets that I don't know about too.
Well, I'm 53, so my story is maybe a bit longer than yours. So I'll condense it a bit. In Japan, first time I was there, I was a student, and I was there when the first Gulf War broke out. The George H.W. Bush led adventure, which in hindsight seems like just a model of restraint and good judgment. When he opted not to invade Iraq. And then after I got my bachelor's degree, I went back to Japan, and I lived there for another year, and I just taught English. And this was in 94, I think. So the stagnation had just set in, and people thought it was temporary. They thought Japan was going to be back to its 1980s going gangbusters economic growth phase. And, but even at the time, there were people teaching English there who were telling, war stories about the glorious, when the streets ran with gold and bread and honey. I mean, you were just getting paid outrageous sums. And looking back on it, I mean, I did. I worked for a company, and they sent me out to. Mostly, I was working for Nippon Denso, a Japanese car company, car manufacturer in the Niigata area, and I would just go to their factories and teach their workers, at the end of the day. And also, I would go to corporate retreat centers and teach at weekend retreats, which was really like a couple hours of English and then lots and lots of drinking. As it's Japan. Um, and teaching the young kids, they weren't kids, they're in their 20s, and I was in my 20s at the time, so I had no right to call them kids. But thinking back, we all seem like kids. But I would teach them, and I'd been doing it for weeks, and there had been they started to get kind of surly and grumbly, and I didn't understand what was happening. And then somebody from my company took me aside and said, look, you're just going and teaching English. You need to, every few weeks, just cancel class and take them out, to a restaurant and eat and drink and socialize, and they'll pay. And I was like, oh, well, heck, I'd much rather do that than teach. So, yeah, that Japan in the 90s. I can't revisit it because it doesn't exist anymore, but I'd be interested to see how things have changed.
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't get here until the 2000s. I'm about a decade off base from you, actually. I'm a little bit older than I look. Maybe, I don't know. Hopefully, that's the way. But it's quite interesting. Even in the pandemic times, one of my favorite things about this country is there's some really interesting things that happened when the Americans kind of came. And Okinawa is a whole different thing, but like at least in the mainland, one of the things that happened was it got built into legislation that the government actually isn't allowed to tell the people what to do. So one of the biggest contrasts that I noticed was during the pandemic, they were incentivizing people to stay home. They were paying them with the carrot and paying shops with the carrot. But it was interesting. I was walking, through the streets in near where I live, which is one of the kind of old, eatery areas. And even on a Sunday, it's usually pretty packed. But everything was empty because it was a pandemic. Everyone was staying home. But I walked by this one place and it was empty. Sorry, and it was full. And I'm like, that's weird. Like, why is this place full? And I look in and there's a sign on the window and it's full of people sitting there drinking canned Asahi and canned Ebisu and other beers. And the sign basically said, bring your own beer, which never happens in Japan, but they're able to get away with that because they're not skirting the rules. They're not breaking anything, right? And so like things like that, like drinking is such a big part of the culture, but like also like following rules, but bending and breaking rules. It's like there's a really weird balance. Like so it kind of reminds me like of your story to go out drinking with the students. It's like if you were to do that, back home, that probably wouldn't go over very well.
No,
right?
no.
So it's funny. Like my dad always says to me, he's like, "Well, I don't know. Like, are you sure you're supposed to have a drink when you're online doing your job?" I'm like, "Dad, I don't know. Like, whatever. A, it's YouTube, and B, it's like I'm in Japan, so my morals are." But so that's interesting. I mean, they're very. I think I see residences maybe, and this might be a thing in North America too. But like I look at my brother. I mean, my brother, he's really smart. He worked for an eco village in the Caribbean, in Belize when he was doing his internship for university, and now he lives in a small town back in southwestern Ontario, working at a construction shop, and he loves it. He's like second or third in command. Married, he's got kids. And at times I miss that because like that simple life of social type of things. But like when I saw your comic, I was like, wow, that's like Japanese corporations tenfold. It's very like we live in a country that has the highest suicide rate on the planet. They're one of the richest, most wealthy countries in the world, and they've got more miserable people than anyone else. We live in a country where the biggest, probably spenders of cryptocurrency are housewives who give their husbands who work, 90 hours a week an allowance. We live in a country that they have a word for it. It's called karoshi, which is death by work. And this woman, a couple of years ago, she committed suicide because she was super stressed out. And it came out that she had worked like 115 hours in a week or something. And so the government decided that they needed to put a rule around this. So they decided that they would cap the working hours per population at 90 hours a week, which meant that 1/3 of the companies out there were like, "Oh, there's a rule around this. You guys can now work 15 more hours than you already do." We live in a country where magic mushrooms were sold in vending machines when I showed up here in Tokyo, until some famous person's kid thought that he could, fly, and then they took that away. But marijuana has been illegal since, America came in and said, "Oh, even at temples you can't use it anymore." Right? It's a country of extremes. But it's interesting to me because, like, bang on what you're talking about in terms of the people not understanding, or the aliens not understanding what they're doing in Antarctica and just going to their jobs. So I'm curious, like, how much influence came out of your experiences in Japan? I mean, maybe none of it.
Consciously, none of it, because, yeah, as I say, Japan is that was the early 90s for me. So I'm quite a ways away from that. But carrying on, actually, just for the benefit of the listeners, I'm sure you know this, but pressure to get into a good college in Japan is intense, like most Americans can't even conceive. And there are entry exams, and every year this happens. The entry exam results are posted, and kids who didn't score high enough to get into a good college, their whole family commits suicide together. Like, the mom and dad pack the kids into the car, and with the garage door closed or whatever, and they all just check out together because they can't live with the shame of, and, all through high school, or even junior high school, the kids, they go to school all day, and then after school they go to a different school, their specialty school, their specialty training school at night, and a lot of it's test prep, or a lot of it's, but then when you get to university, if you got into a good one, you don't have to really study, you don't need to go to class, really. You're just there to meet people.
Right.
The important thing is to join the right club, like, to be a member of the archery club. So, I think this actually does play into the comic, because that main character, he's not the main character. He's a foil to the main characters, but his degree is in planetary ecology, but he doesn't care a thing about it. He just studied planetary ecology because he knew that the corporation, or the consortium that he works for, liked to recruit from the planetary ecology department at the particular university that he went to. So he was just in that field to make connections for career.
Dude, that's my university that I used to teach at, in a nutshell, right? Like it's a kind of a second-tier university. It's still pretty good. They've got some decent clubs, but that's why people go there, because they know that, like, the company president's kids go there, right? And so they can make those connections, which is really interesting. And, like, I think 90% of what you said is probably still true today. I don't know about the whole family suicide thing. Like, I think we're kind of beyond that. It might still potentially happen, but I don't know about it. But yeah, like, the ideas about the after school schools, like, that drives me crazy, because, like, the kids, they don't do their homework. They don't do anything in university. It's flipped, right? Like, if you're in an American university and you don't study, right, like, that's it, you're out. You don't get to come back. If you're in a Japanese university and you don't study and your teacher fails you, the president of the university will call the teacher in and say, "Are we really sure we need to fail this person? Can we just not spend, like, an extra 2 weeks with them to, like, help them pass?" It's really bizarre, right? So yeah, I that's interesting to me. So how about permaculture? How does that play into your life? Because I'm kind of curious about that as well.
Let me throw the bio story into fast forward here. I came back after teaching English in Japan, and I went to grad school for philosophy. And
nice.
Yeah, and then when I left, I had been communicating. I met a guy online. We were both on Usenet news groups talking about memes. And his name's Richard Brody, and he's written a book. It's pretty well known. It's called Virus of the Mind, The New Science of the Meme. And he wrote the first version of Microsoft Word. He was a retired, Microsoft millionaire at that time. And he he suggested that I come to Seattle, and I had some friends who were moving to Seattle, so I just tagged along with him. And I figured he'd get me a job at Microsoft. And when I got there, he suggested that I go interview at Amazon. And I did. And I had 3 interviews. My final interview was with Jeff Bezos. And yeah, I worked there for a couple of years and got good stock options, and stupidly cashed them all out immediately. Just said, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm done. It was a nice chunk of change. It was enough for me to go, and to just be me for a while. But if I'd waited just a little while, held on to that stock just a few months more, it would have been many millions of dollars. And I have a similar story with crypto. But anyway, fast forward from there, got married, spent some of the money living in Australia for a time, had a couple kids, had to basically in my late 30s with a decade-sized hole in my CV, go and find a job. And I was living here in Arkansas at the time, and there just wasn't much to do, where I was. And I got into selling insurance, which is horrible, but it actually kind of prepared me. But my whole life I've been preparing to be a podcaster, even though I didn't know what podcasts, would be. Like I took voice and articulation in even before college. When I was in high school, I joined a book club. And this is back in the days where when you joined a book club, you got this page of stamps, and all the stamps were the titles or the covers of books, and you'd peel them off and, put them on a card and send it back to the company, and they'd send you the books. They used to do that with records and things as well. And even in high school, I bought a book on voice and articulation.
I think you cut out there for a minute. I'm not. We can't hear you. I'm not sure. It says your mic. There you go. Yeah, now it works.
Well, anyway, got into podcasting, and in podcasting, I was really interested in talking about how awful the drug war is. And I was interested in talking about psychedelics, and I was interested in talking about small scale farming, because reading the books of Michael Pollan had put in my head that I wanted to live out on the land and, farm and build a house. And the podcast didn't go the way I wanted it to. The people who were, the big names in Singularitarian thinking at the time, they didn't answer my emails, when I sent them requests to talk to me. And I soon realized that I've got about 20 minutes worth of the drug war sucks. And if you've heard that and you still need convincing, then I'm not the podcaster for you. You don't really want to come and listen to my stuff. And psychedelics is a longer story, but I had been to the Peruvian Amazon a couple times at that point to drink ayahuasca. And over the course of my podcasting over the next few years, I went a couple more times. And there's a lot of weird ego going on in, the psychedelic scene. Like people who discover they can make some money, providing ayahuasca or whatever, whatever psychedelic experience. They also discover that they can kind of become a cult leader just kind of automatically. People you don't know come and pay you money to put themselves in a very susceptible state in your presence. And it requires enormous integrity not to abuse that. And so many people fail that test. And it's just kind of weird and ugly. And, you get into these mystical states with mushrooms or ayahuasca or whatever, you get into this selfless sort of transpersonal state. And you think that, oh, my ego has been dissolved. I'm beyond the ego. And no, your ego reforms stronger than ever. It's like you break a bone, and when the bone heals, it's stronger than it was before you broke it. The ego is like that. If you regularly dissolve your ego with psychedelics, it comes back with a vengeance.
I think we lost you again. I'm wondering if you keep bumping your table or your mic or something.
Could be.
Yeah.
I'll be scrupulous not to do that.
Is that an abominable mic that you have there?
It is a Yeti Black Snowball.
Yeah. So that I've got the Yeti too, and it's a bit problematic. I do that all the time. I get excited, and my hands go like this, and I bump it, and I lose everything.
Well, anyway, I got into podcasting, and the things that I thought I was going to talk about didn't pan out. But fortunately, one of the first people I interviewed was Lorenzo Haggerty, who does the Psychedelic Salon podcast. And he had access to this enormous trove of Terence McKenna recordings. And so his show became very, very popular. And he had a prominent link to my podcast on his main page for many years. So a lot of my audience is like, it's a subset of the Psychedelic Salon audience. But I discovered that the things that I had planned to talk about just weren't panning out. And I just so happened to read this, like the slides of a PowerPoint presentation by this guy named Dmitry Orlov, who was born in the Soviet Union, but moved to the US at the age of 12, but he speaks fluent Russian. And he went back to the Soviet Union, or back to Russia, just after the Soviet Union collapsed during their really terrible period. You know, when people were just drinking themselves to death, and it's just a terrible time for Russians. And he came back to the U.S. and he decided that the Soviet Union had collapsed, but they were recovering from it, and that the U.S. collapse was coming. And I think his presentation was called "Closing the Collapse Gap: The Soviet Example and U.S. Prospects." And eventually, I interviewed him. And he was talking about peak oil. And that led me to other authors like James Howard Kunstler, who I've interviewed many times, and John Michael Greer, but a guy named Albert Bates, who runs the Eco Village Training Center at the farm in Summertown, Tennessee. He was into peak oil, and he had heard some of my interviews, and he contacted me and said, "Hey, I'd be a good guest on your show." And I learned very quickly that when somebody approaches you and says, "I'd be a good guest in your show," to just tune them out. But I did go and check him out. And he really would have been a good guest. And in fact, he invited me to come and he invited me to come and visit him at the Eco Village Training Center. And I did, and I recorded podcasts and things. And then I went on with my life. And then a few years later, I got divorced, and I was a total wreck, and my life was just chaos. And I had quit my job, and I was actually doing a couch surfing speaking tour. And I was on the West Coast going, I started in LA and San Francisco, and then a couple spots, up north, and proceeding all the way up to Seattle, Portland, Seattle. And along that path, I got an email from Albert, who understood that I was sort of at loose ends and didn't really know what to do. And he said, "Why don't you come to the Eco Village Training Center and be the winter caretaker?" Because, winters are pretty awful in Tennessee, and he goes to Mexico for the winters. He's got a place in Holbox where he spends his winters quite wisely. But somebody's got to keep the fires burning, literally, at the Eco Village Training Center. So I did that, but then winter ended. And what was I going to do? And we just looked around for different places, different positions for me. And eventually I just became really the podcaster in residence. And not only did he give me a place to live, but he gave me a stipend, which was enough for me to pay my child support. And I could just basically be there at the Eco Village Training Center. And so many people come through there, so many people worth interviewing come through there. So I could just sit there, and the interviews came to me in person. It was great. But then I connected with a woman who was living in New York City, and we met when I went to New York in 2011. Got to see the beginning of Occupy Wall Street, which was pretty exciting. I got to see it descend into the nonsense that has sort of overtaken the left in general over the past decade, which was dispiriting. But anyway, I formed a romantic connection with this woman, and she was going to move out to Tennessee, and we were going to get some land and build a little place outside the farm. And then we both, I think, came to the realization, no, I should go to New York and just live in New York. So I did that, and
it's like being on the road with Jack Kerouac interview.
Yeah. Well, I'm compressing it, because it's 2 years here and a couple of years there. And I was in New York for about 4.5 years, living in a beautiful neighborhood in Brooklyn, right next to the Greenwood Cemetery. If anybody knows where that is, it's a huge, huge cemetery. And I was doing work study at a yoga studio, which was just a couple blocks away, and podcasting, and that was great. And then she decided to sell the condo that she had bought, and cash in those gains, because there's the real estate prices just kept going up and up and up, and there's this sensation of it's like you're holding crypto, and the price is going up and up and up, and do I sell?
and you don't want to sell and then discover, that you sold way too early. But eventually the point came where she said, I got to lock these in. And she sold, and we moved to Vermont where she bought a house. Then the relationship kind of disintegrated. And I was on my own living in Vermont for several years, and I didn't know anybody there, and I didn't really have any reason to be there. So just at the end of last year, I came here to Arkansas, which is where my mother lives. She and my brother are my only remaining, close family. So I'm now living in the house that my grandfather built, that my mother grew up in, on 10 acres with cows, and I'm living the rural life. It's not the rural dream, but it's the rural life.
That's interesting. Yeah, so for any artistic people out there, if you haven't tried couch surfing for your art, you should definitely do it. I wrote a book when I was just out of university, and I couch surfed across Canada, selling them at university campuses, and people bought them for their sisters or whatever. It was a book that I actually self-bound in my own garage, which was really fun.
Oh wow!
So it's definitely a way to experience the world. We didn't quite get to the point where we could do this yet, because you're an interesting guest, and usually when we have super interesting guests, we don't even get to the point sometimes where we do gratitudes, but we should put those up on the wall. Let's go here. I gotta find that portal. There we go. Uplifters Tower. So this is Uplifters Tower. If you don't know, this is our portal. This is by the mountain bike, or the Emtiber, and he put these on sale to I think fund the DAO. Some of it went towards funding the DAO, which was really kind of him. But this was the one that I liked, and I wanted to put it as a portal in our Uplifters Tower. And luckily enough, I was actually able to pick up the one of this one, so that was pretty cool.
Now, is that procedurally generated? Is that like a deep dream sort of thing? It's got that iterative feel to it.
Yeah, so there's a post on where we had all the alpha.com that people can check out. But basically, it's an AI generated of a photo that he took when he was biking. I forget exactly where that was, but he did a few renditions of it, which was pretty cool. That's interesting. I lost where we're supposed to be.
What server is this on?
So this is in Genesis. This is Uplifters Tower. This is where it's mostly where Corey and I call home. This is our show. This is our show kind of team build. Interesting enough, actually, it's one of the early community plots that went out in Genesis. A lot of them were given out to early adopters in Genesis before we even had servers, really. And this was kind of the one that we chose for our show, which is funny. It's sitting in our own unique wallet. It's not generating rewards for us at present. So, I'll go first, because honestly, I'm really grateful to have. That's not gonna fit. As I say, I'm really grateful to have shared experiences with KMO, but Jimmy D is grateful to KMO of this. I'll just put this in there.
Right on.
I know you're a podcaster, but we'll go with that.
Well, I built the Geb gallery in the Uplift, so that's appropriate.
What are you grateful for today, KMO?
I am grateful for the meditation app that I use, which is weird that the name of it's not coming to mind, as I have to name it every morning when I ask Alexa to turn it on. Gosh, what's it called?
I do that too, and it's in the back of your head, but it just won't come out, and it's like
Headspace.
That's what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay.
Headspace.
I didn't know whether you were talking.
Probably need a capital H on that.
I didn't know whether you were talking that like when it's in the back of your mind and it won't come out. It's called Headspace. I wasn't sure.
It's the Headspace app. Yeah, I've meditated on and off for most of my life, but since the Headspace app, since I started using it just like 2.5 years ago, I've been meditating daily, and it's really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I kind of found you when I needed to. My life is a bit weird. Like I have this weird way of looking at the world that kind of comes from perspective. And one of the worst things about moving, because we're planning a move, and for me, one of the worst things about moving is my books, and sometimes I try to get rid of my books, but it's really difficult for me to get rid of my books because my books are full of my notes. Mm-hmm. I'm that guy who writes in my books, and it's all kind of perspective based on what I'm talking about. And I do that with some of my blogs as well, but it's quite interesting. Some of the conversations that you brought up were similar things that I'm going through, which is really fun. So I'm actually grateful for perspective-based patience and peace of mind. Talking about that whole
D there.
That's all right. We spelled things wrong on all of our servers are spelled wrong except for this one. Yeah, you asked. This is Uplifters Tower. This is essentially this is Corey's creation. We were doing them over at the cathedral, but we wanted to do some for our show, and so Corey came and we decided to do that. And there's one. It used to be just one wall down here at the bottom. And we were building it up, and we were like, "Wait a minute, this is filling up really fast. What are we gonna do?" And so, he decided to kind of open this up, and I'm like, "It's like an inverted umbrella." And he's like, "It's a permaculture area. Let's fill it with trees." Right? This is the weird video game that we live in. So, yeah. I mean, I'm curious about the. You kind of gave us your background, and I'm hoping that you'll come back in a couple weeks because I know Corey really wants to meet you and talk about some of the probably the Peruvian thing is a good thing to talk about Corey because he's quite interested in those types of things, and also he pretends not to be interested in politics, but he's really easy to suck in. He used to do a politics, a show with another friend of his, who's now become a friend of ours. But I'm quite curious about the whole recovering libertarian, right? Because we're in this space where. So you're right. I'm a little bit younger than you, but it's fun for me because one of the things that I look back on in history, because I'm a historian as well, and I always look back on the fact that probably the most successful people that I know at some point in their life, at least North American side, are I'm going to say recovering hippies, but I don't even think they're recovering. I just if you look at them, some of the smartest businessmen out there, right? Some of the people who built the best companies or you just looking at them why is that guy so, why didn't I think of that? Right. A lot of them are those 60 generation hippie type of people, right? And that's what I seem to see. And I'm sure that there's other people on the other side of that really, didn't amount to anything, but it's always interesting to me to see that. And I see that a lot in the crypto space too, right? We see a lot of decentralists. I'm one of those right now. DeFi that isn't decentralized. There's some issues with that, right? There's a lot of companies that might, move to certain areas like Singapore or Malta, just so that they can skirt the rules more. Right. And so I'm always interested in how this plays out. Right. One of the things that I really think that EOS or EOS.io has going for it is the fact that, they can freeze people's accounts if they've got 15 out of 21 block producers signatures. And I think that's how we get to mass adoption. If we think that the world is going to sign on to a completely decentralized system and buy into Bitcoin because nobody controls it, I mean, it'd be nice, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think these multi-billion-dollar banks and corporations are going to be able to do that, right? You mentioned at Amazon.io, and I mean, yeah, Jeff Bezos is looking at, implementing, crypto in his own way, right? But like, it's taken him this long even, right? And so I'm kind of curious on why, A, you're a libertarian, and B, well, where do you think the space is going in general?
Well, I'm a former libertarian.
Yeah, sorry, that's not
yeah. In a presidential election, I'll vote either libertarian or green, and if you're on a left-right axis, those are at far extremes from each other, but it's basically just a none of the above vote. So last time around, I voted for Howie Hawkins, but the time before that, I voted for who was the Aleppo guy, Gary Johnson. Of the libertarian candidate, because I just can't bring myself to vote for Democrats or Republicans. I would have voted for Bernie Sanders, if he'd gotten the nomination, but he didn't. He was my senator, when I was living in Vermont. But so yeah, libertarianism. I discovered it. Like, I was a libertarian before I knew the term. And it kind of came from getting like Ayn Rand memes secondhand. Like, I never read Atlas Shrugged or any of her novels, but that mindset still, other people kind of ripped it off and repackaged it, and that's how I encountered it. So, I got into libertarianism proper because the libertarians were really the only people who had a principled objection to the drug war. There were some compassionate objections, but they weren't really, for a guy like me and the mind that I had studying philosophy, I needed a thoroughgoing system of interlocking arguments and positions that were self-coherent. And the positions of the mainstream parties are just not coherent in that way. They're this weird collection of commitments made to special interests. But eventually, like, libertarian talking points haven't changed since I first got into it in the mid-90s. But the world has changed dramatically. Nothing about the digital revolution or the fall of the Soviet Union or, the rise of cryptocurrency, the rise of the internet. Throughout all of this, the libertarians, the doctrinaire libertarians are still saying the exact same things. And it gets to the point where if when I talk, if I'm articulating my point of view, you could just lift a page from somebody else's book and drop it in, to my script, and it doesn't change anything, then I get impatient with it. It's like, okay, I'm too bound up with this now. And what's more, I'm not committed to, propositions like taxation is theft or, never initiate violence. These are just sort of, to my mind, they've degenerated into thought-stopping catchphrases. But what I'm really interested in is results. I want people, to have health and safety and the ability to, pursue the development of their gifts, to self-actualize, to use a $2 word. And I'm not convinced that there's any one political system that is always going to lead to good results. I think, the direction that the political system needs to take is going to change depending on the conditions on the ground. And that's just something I never hear from libertarians. They just insist if you get rid of government and let the private, sector take over, everything is going to be sweet and beautiful. And it's like, no, it's not. Come on. Particularly go to Seattle, go to San Francisco, go to LA and just walk the streets. That you don't want to live in that world. You don't want, like, Curtis Yarvin, you know who he is? Mencius Moldbug.
I might not. No.
Well, he's a monarchist. He thinks that there should just, and by monarch, he doesn't mean a hereditary monarchy like, with a king, but monarch just being there's one ruler, one person who makes all the decisions. And back when Steve Jobs was alive, he said, Steve Jobs should just be appointed the CEO of the United States because he'd run it properly. So he, Moldbug or Yarvin, and I follow his stuff to this day. I'm not running him down. I'm just, describing his position.
Bill Gates must have really winced at that one.
Yeah. Oh, Bill.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's all good. Where was I going with all that? I don't know.
Steve Jobs should just be appointed as the CEO of the United States because he would run it properly.
Right. So
and so one ruler type of thing, a monarchist.
And that's if you say that, people in Silicon Valley are going to say, yeah, that guy knows what he's talking about. So, Curtis Yarvin is kind of a cult celebrity with a powerful and rich audience. I don't know why I brought him up, though. Basically, I'm interested in, check this out. This was my guy in the last election.
Nice. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know Yang, I mean, what's the 3-sentence? What are the 3 most important things about Yang? Right. He ran on a platform.
Universal basic income.
UBI, cryptocurrency was a big part, right? Yeah.
More after he lost, and then he ran for mayor of New York and lost there. Then I think he got into the crypto crowd, because now he's talking about decentralized autonomous organizations and whatnot. But that wasn't part of his presidential campaign message. But he's basically his philosophy is humanity first, humanity over business, humanity over government, humanity over profit. Just we have subordinated human well-being to all of these other priorities.
Well, and I think it gets worse as time goes on, because we're so plugged into catchphrases in a way with media,
Mm-hmm.
right? And a lot of people don't get it. Like the one comes to mind. My favorite one comes to mind. Like there were people in Canada. They were, quoting their constitutional right to freedom of speech. It's like, yeah, but you're Canadian. You don't have a constitution. You have you have the right to reasonable assembly, but like you don't have the First, Second, Third Amendment. But like they're insisting that these amendments are their rights, and it's like, no, like they're not. Like, I mean, whether you believe that they should be or not is irrelevant. They're not. Like, until you nationalize as American, they're not, right? And so that's like, it's interesting to me. And it's like, one of my favorite things about Japan is nobody pays attention to politics, and the only time that they do, it's because some politician breaks down crying because he got caught breaking the rules. Now, people aren't surprised that like he broke the rules. He doesn't say, "Oh, I'm sorry for breaking the rules." He says, I'm sorry I got caught. I'm sorry I was dumb enough to get caught," right? And he goes online and he breaks down, and it becomes this whole thing because the Japanese people are like, that guy's dumb. He got caught, right? Like, it's not like that guy sucks. He did something wrong. It's like, that guy's dumb. He got caught, right? And so it's interesting when you look at it from a Japanese perspective, and melding all of those things to me together with permaculture is really, like, a lot of people don't know what permaculture is, but the easy way to understand it is permaculture doesn't try to conform anything to its own will. It's not just gardening. It's not just like, there's businesses, there's communities, there's whole other aspects that are built into it, right? What it does is it looks at the environment, and then it looks at how to maximize the potential in that environment, right? And it's like, if you have to flatten the fields and drain all the rivers just to be able to pump a bunch of chemicals into a corn farm because your investors want you to plant corn. Probably if you thought about the environment that you're in, you could maximize your potential to grow something else and probably make more money, right? And this is always really interesting to me, because when I think about what the potential for DAOs is in the cryptocurrency space, like, a lot of people are looking at DAOs as, a decentralized solution for governance, and there should be like all of these things. But when I look at DAOs or DACs or metaverses or platforms, I look at it from the perspective of, how do we maximize all the potential that's there, every single thing, every single part of it. And what's nice about the Uplift World is, I think, in a way, we've kind of done it, right? Like, we've got creative worlds, we've got survival worlds, we've got galleries, we've got people who are building shops, we like, right? Like, we're trying to plug all of this in while still, like, sticking to the rules and things like that, right? Like, I mean, I hope I get to visit your small farm someday, because I'm sure that your small farm is operational on a very different level than most of the neighbors, right? Like
well, this is my mother's farm. There are no permaculture principles at work here. I mean, she's raising beef cattle, and she just buys hay and feeds them in the winter, and they graze on grass in the summer. And she doesn't control their breeding. They breed year round.
Well, that's kind of permaculture in a way. I mean,
yeah, it's more just kind of half-assed.
Fair enough.
But yeah, it's
more.
There's a bit of the one straw revolution in it, you know.
Fair enough.
But
you do know it. Nice.
Do you know the story of how the Ford company tried to set up a rubber plantation in the Amazon during World War II?
Yes, I read about that story in 1493. I think it was
Charles Mann book.
Yeah, those books were brilliant. But yeah,
I've interviewed Charles Mann repeatedly.
Nice.
He's
brilliant. Nice. Yeah, that's great.
But for those who don't know, I'll try to keep it short. The Ford Motor Company, you know, they needed rubber, and this is during the war, and I think they had government contracts, and they just went. I think it was in Brazil, but they went to Amazonia, and they tried to set up a plantation without knowing anything about the local conditions. They just thought, you know, ground is a medium. You plant things in the ground, you water it, the stuff grows. We're just going to go there. We're going to level a patch of Amazon jungle, and we are going to impose our industrial vision on this plot. And we're also going to hire locals, but we're not going to take any of their needs into account. We are just going to tell them, this is the structure. This is how it works. You're going to do it this way. And of course, nothing worked, you know, so you got to pay attention to the conditions on the ground, and you got to work with what's there. And this reminds me of libertarianism or any political philosophy where, you know, Marxism, say, you insist that these, if you internalize these maxims and these principles and you organize yourself in this way, regardless of existing conditions, you're going to get paradise on earth. And it doesn't work that way, you know? So
I mean, the tax one bothers me a bit. Like, I don't like paying taxes, right? Like, I don't think it's great, but like, it's like, no, we should never pay taxes. I'm like, okay, dude, then don't walk on the sidewalks. Don't use the roads.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, you know, people get really pissed off when you have to pay for a highway expense, right? But like, it's like, okay, well, like, where does it come from if you don't, right? And I think this is the world that we live in, and we're a little bit spoiled in the West, right? Like, you don't, like, I don't know. I get really annoyed when I have to pay to use the bathroom in Europe or in Africa or in South America, right? Like, but then I also get really annoyed when the bathroom is super dirty because nobody cleans it in China or you know, South Korea. You know, I'm really spoiled with bathrooms when it comes to it. You know that.
Yeah. The land of the heated toilet seat. Yes.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I really hope that you come back in a couple of weeks, because I think we've only really scratched the surface of what we could. And I did really enjoy meeting you. I actually have to jump into another show in about 10 minutes. I'm going live with my good friend Sean over on the Crypto Writer Network to dive into our obscurity and beyond, where I'll try not to drink too much shochu and lose the plot again. But yeah, just to give you a heads up, we don't have to end right now. But is there anything else that you wanted to bring up today, you know, before we let everyone get back to their day?
Well, as you can tell, I can talk endlessly. So,
I mean, you've got a lot of good guests, so let's start there. For people, yeah. I think I put your Twitter in the description below, and I think if people follow to your Twitter, they can follow to your YouTube channel and subscribe. Mm-hmm. And I knew that you had some interesting guests, but like Charles Mann, like that's pretty cool. So definitely, like, who's your favorite guest of all time? And that's a really bad question. It's like, who's your favorite child? But who are some of the stand-up guests that you've had on your show? Maybe you can leave us with that, and then people can check it out. And then maybe the next time that you come back, they'll have some questions that they can ask or throw in the comments or something.
Well, I mean, Charles Mann's a really smart guy, great to talk to, and I really enjoy his books. I've only talked to him a couple times, though. There are people that I've met through the podcast that I've had on dozens of times. So people like James Howard Kunstler, I would suggest you check out his website. I don't know what your profanity policy is here on this broadcast.
Go for it.
Okay. His, it's Kunstler.com, Kunstler, but his blog is called Clusterfuck Nation.
Nice.
And it's a lot of fun. Now he's, the country kind of bifurcated tribally, politically over the last decade, but it really accelerated in the Trump years. And he broke red, whereas a lot of other people broke blue. So, at the start of the Trump administration, he was describing Trump as a dangerous buffoon, and now he's, pure MAGA. But still, he's a brilliant guy. And his degree, he's an elderly gentleman, we'll say, but his degree was in drama. So he went to college to learn to be a colorful character, and he got straight A's in being a colorful character. So I definitely suggest people check out James Howard Kunstler. Another is John Michael Greer. He had a blog for years called the Archdruid Report because he really was the head of a druidic order here in the United States. His new blog is called Eco Sophia, and I don't follow it as closely as I did his previous blog, but these are people that I met in the peak oil scene, and the peak oil scene basically, has destroyed itself, largely from overly aggressive predictions of impending doom, but also, it was a weird mix of people to start with. And when the country bifurcated into hard blue and hard red, the peak oil community really got shredded and torn in those two directions. John Michael Greer, though, is somebody who, his superpower is that he can read books, and he can read books that are more than 100 years old, and he doesn't get distracted by screens. Like he doesn't really like to watch TV. For him, the internet is a medium for the exchange of ideas via text. So he's not on YouTube, he's not listening to podcasts, and he's not distracted like the rest of us are. And he's got the patience and the memory to read old books and present those ideas to people who themselves will never read them. Kind of people like me, I'm afraid to say. I used to read like mad. I used to read so many books, and I always had multiple books going. And now it's either audiobooks or YouTube. I never read anymore. It kind of drives me nuts.
I have a book of titles and authors of every book I've ever read, and I would read usually more than 100 books a year.
Wow.
Which is quite a bit. But I think probably a decade ago, I basically found permaculture, and I was doing a lot of like random reading. And then after that, I came back to Japan, and the tech, society bit me, and I ended up just, surfing the web and doing random stuff. And it's really hard in this day and age to not get distracted by screens. Even like, I don't let my daughter, my 2-year-old, watch any TV. And it's funny, like we let her watch a little bit when she's brushing her teeth. Right? Mm-hmm. Like one show or something. It's, it's good for her memory. Then she dances. When the other day we caught her, sitting in the Japanese, squatting kind of position on the floor, and I didn't think anything of it. I was doing something, and then my missus came in, and she realized that there was a 1-inch corner of the screen that was blue, that was like upside down, that she could mm-hmm. just see over the edge of the table, and she's glued to that thing. And I was just like, this is like, it kind of scared me, and I'm just like, wow, like she can't even see anything. Like she knows that there's something there, and she's just waiting to catch a glimpse. And like earlier that week, she was sitting in her high chair, and she's just sitting going like this on the table, on the table of her high chair. And my missus says, what are you doing? And she's like, Daddy need that. She didn't even acknowledge, like she didn't even look, right? She just said, oh yeah, I'm being like Daddy. Like, typing. And I'm like, she's like, come look at this. And she's like, what are you doing? She's like, Daddy need that. I'm like staring straight forward. There's no screen there. There's nothing there. And I'm just like, wow, man, I gotta unplug. I gotta turn stuff off, right? Like I gotta spend more time, focused on the real life, when you have kids and things like that. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I really enjoyed meeting you, and I feel like there's just so much more to unearth and uncover. So, yeah, please, really grateful that you were able to join us. But in closing thoughts, Corey and I, when we built this network, weren't focused on ratings. We weren't focused on clicks. What we were focused on was having, people, return guests that would come and would enlighten us with what's going on in their world, right? That's what the metaverse is about. It's not about a game. It's not about Minecraft. I mean, there's some great aspects about that, but what it's about is like building connections with people, right? And I think that's become even more apparent over the course of the pandemic. And what we learned from it. And I just think what you're doing, I don't know that much about the podcast, but like, it sounds really interesting. So I definitely want to check it out. But the comic, like just the ideas behind it, I just think the way that you sync those two ideas together. So yeah, thank you very much, KMO.
Hey, Jimmy, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
All of you, if you're around, I'll try to post it on Twitter. Come join Sean and I, where we'll dive into the edge of obscurity, probably give away some stuff. I don't know what we'll be talking about, but it's going to be good. And as for that, did you ever study any martial arts when you were in your time in Japan?
I did. Yeah. I studied Shotokan.
So I don't know if this is appropriate or if this is if this is tasteless, but can you give us a chop?
A chop. Let's see. These days I'm much more of a Tai Chi guy than a hard style Shotokan guy. So
all right, let's do the Tai Chi chop then.
Okay.